Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So in the first material present about adjectives. What is adjective? Let me tell you about distinctive properties of prototypical adjectives. Adjectives typically denote properties of objects, persons, place. For example, properties relating to age, like old, young, size, like big, small, shape, like round, flat, and so on. Prototypical adjectives in English have the following three properties. 1. Function. In function, they have attributive and predicative uses. Attributive adjective function as internal pre-head modifier to following noun. For example, an old car. Old is pre-head modifier to following noun car. Black hair, good news, and then predicative use. The function as predicative complement in clause structure. The car is old. Old show predicative complement in clause structure the car. Her hair is black. The news is good. 2. Great. Inflect for great, showing a contrast between plain, comparative, and superlative forms. For example, in plain, she is tall. In comparative, she is taller than you. In superlative, she is the tallest of them all. For the second example, this is useful. This is more useful than that. This is the most useful one. 3. Modification. They can be modified usually by adverbs. For example, too old. To show adverb to modify old. Remarkably tall. Extremely useful to us. The next material is about adjective versus nouns. In this section, we pick out a selection of the most decisive properties that do distinguish between nouns and adjective. 1. Inflection. Nouns typically have plural inflected forms. Adjective in English never do. Conversely, many adjectives have comparative and superlative inflected forms, but no nouns do. For example, in plural forms with s or es, in noun, judges, sizes, silks. In superlative forms with s cannot be used in. Second example, in superlative forms with s, wisest, biggest, smoothest. This is cannot be used in plural forms with s or es. Not all nouns have plural forms, and not all adjectives have comparative and superlative forms. But where the forms do exist, the difference between nouns and adjectives is particularly clear. 2. Determiners. Nouns take determiners as dependent, but adjectives do not. Some of determinatives that function as determiner in NP structure, however, can also function as modifier in adjective phrase structure. For example, use determinative which and some. In noun, which judge, my size, some silk. But in forms adjective, which and some cannot use in. Next, the fused modifier-head contraction. For example, in simple, the first version wasn't very good, but the second was fine. Words of the second look like nouns, but they are not nouns, they are adjectives. For the second example, in partitive, I couldn't afford even the cheapest of them. It is superlative form. Cheapest cannot be a noun. In special, this tax cut will benefit only the rich. It is special interpretation. The form in the special construction can be clearly identified as an adjective.
Okay, next me. I am Fitria Nur Laily. I will do presentation about adjectives versus verbs. For the verb enable us to distinguish adjectives from verbs in a similar way, and a discussion of adjectives and verbs in English have the following three properties. 1. Inflection and grade. Most distinctive are the preteriate and third person singular forms. Let's just go to the example. In preteriate forms, this is a verb loved, regret, enjoy. This is a true example. And for a verb in comparative forms, like lover, is of course established in a quite different sense as a noun, but the point here is that it's not the comparative of love. And for adjective in preteriate forms, this is a wrong example because adjective can't be added to ad, right? And for adjective in comparative forms, there is a writing and a. That means we wouldn't expect a comparative inflectional forms for appreciative because adjectives of this length don't take great inflection, but even with appreciative there is a comparative marked by more. In this verb, can't use I more love you. The verb love here can be used after the subject, and more is placed after the verb of love. And for adjective, I am more appreciative than you. The opposite of the verb from must use to be, and more is placed after to be. Next to modifiers. Verbs take largely the same modifiers as adjectives. Nevertheless, there are some adverbs that can modify adjectives but not verbs. Okay, for the example. Anyway, all the example of verbs here are wrong example. And for the adjectives, like I am very fond of her, he's pretty sad, she was too appreciative, provides a very clear indication of their status as adjectives as opposed to verbs. Not all adjectives are semantically compatible with the degree modifiers very, too, and pretty. They have to denote a property that can hold to a greater and lesser extent. We will call a scalar property. Next, function. A major difference between verb and adjective is the verb's function as predicator or head of a verb phrase in clause structure, whereas adjectives do not. For example, they love you. Love is a verb, and for adjective, they are fond of you. Fond is adjectives, and are is predicator in the sentence.
The next material, adjective versus determinatives. For example, in determinative, she gave me some apples. It is inadmissible because some cannot follow the. In adjective, He gave me the good apples. In the second example, determinative, some guy called to see you. An adjective, good guy called to see you. The word guy is a count singular noun and requires a determiner such as some. In the third example, I took some of the book. In adjective, I took good of the books. Some is push-head with a partitive complement, a contraction which does not admit adjective except for comparative and superlative. For example, the younger of, the two, the best of the lot.
Okay, next, gradable and non-gradable adjectives. Prototypical adjectives have comparative and superlative forms and take degree modifiers such as very, to, and property. Adjectives of this kind are said to be gradable. Not all adjectives are of this kind. There are also non-gradable adjectives as in an alphabetical list. Alphabetical thus denotes a non-scalar property. For examples of non-gradable adjectives, the chief, difficulty, a medical problem, federal tax, and for the underlined, it's non-gradable adjectives. Next, the gradable versus non-gradable distinction applies to use rather than lexems as such. A. In non-gradable use, in the public interest, and B. In gradable use, a very public quarrel. Public in non-gradable use, that mean in bahasa untuk kepentingan umum, and public in the gradable use, that mean pertengkaran yang sangat umum. Typically, as in these examples, the non-gradable sense is the basic one, with the gradable sense responding and extend use.
Okay, my name is Maulidiyah Hafshah. So now I would like to explain to you about the structure of adjective phrase. An adjective phrase consists of an adjective as a head. Usually, it is accompanied by one or more dependents, and the dependents may be complements or modifiers. The first is complements. The complements are almost always prepositional phrase. For example, afraid of the dark, kind to children, bent on revenge, and remote from reality. Afraid is an adjective, and of the dark is prepositional phrase, and the function of prepositional phrase is the complement of the adjective. And the second complement is subordinate clause. For example, glad it was over, uncertain what to do, and busy making lunch. Glad is an adjective and it was over is subordinate clause. Remember, the choice of preposition depends on the head adjective. So, we could then say afraid on the dark or bent of revenge. It also happened in subordinate clause, which depends on the adjective. So we couldn't say glad what to do and busy to make lunch and so on. The second dependence is modifier. The most common type of modifier is an adverb. For example, extremely hot, morally wrong, and very useful. Hot is an adjective, and this is a head. The modifier is extremely. It is adverb. The second modifier is determinatives. For example, this young, that old, no different. Young is a head, and this as modifier, and it is determinative. The third modifier is prepositional phrase. For example, is cautious to excess and dangerous in the extreme. Cautious is a head, and the modifier is to excess. It is prepositional phrase. And the fourth modifier is noun phrase. For the example, 5 years old, 2 hours long, and a great deal smaller. 5 years is noun phrase, and this is a modifier, and old is a head. Okay, for the next is about predicative complements and predicative adjuncts. Generally, the adjective has function as a complement in clause structure. For the example of predicative complement is Max was unwilling to accept these terms. Usually, the adjective of predicative complement happen after the verb be. For this example, unwilling to accept this term is happen after verb be, that was. Besides that, predicative complements also can occur either in complex intransitive and complex transitive clauses. For the example of complex intransitive clause, the suggestion is ridiculous. Ridiculous is predicative complements. And the example for complex transitive clause is I consider the suggestion ridiculous. The adjective of ridiculous is related to predicate that is subject in the complex intransitive construction, and object in the complex transitive construction. The predicate is the suggestion. How about predicative adjunct? The example of predicative adjunct is unwilling to accept these terms, make resigned. Usually, predicative adjunct detached by intonation or punctuation from the rest of the clause. Look at the example of unwilling to accept these terms. After that, there is a punctuation, then continued by make resigned. This is the difference between predicative complement and predicative adjunct. For the next is about adjectives restricted to attributive or predicative function. Most adjectives can occur in either of two major functions, for attributive and predicative. For the first is attributive only adjectives. In the attributive use, the adjective function as modifier to a following noun in noun phrase structure. For the example is the damn budget cuts, the eventual winner and her former husband. Husband is a head and the modifier is a farmer, and former is an adjective. The second is never attributive adjectives, or usually I call it as predicative function. In the predicative use, it generally occurs after the verb be or one of a small subclass of similar verb such as seem, looked, and feel, and etc. For the example is the house was ablaze. Ablaze is a predicative complement of was. And the last is about other function of adjective phrase. Besides the two major functions, there are two relatively minor functions of adjective. They are post-positive adjective and external modifiers. Post-positive adjectives function in noun phrase structure as post-head internal modifier, and it placed after the noun or pronoun. There are three cases to consider. The first is, for example, everything useful, somebody rich, somewhere safe, and etc. For example, is somebody rich. Rich is adjective and somebody is noun. Because the rich placed after the noun and it is for modified the noun, so it is named by post-positive. And the second example is children keen on sport, a report full of errors, and etc. Keen on sport, this is an adjective and it has its own post-head dependent. The last is the only modification possible, and the one is asleep. A limited number of adjectives can occur post-positively with their own dependence and with a non-fused head noun. The last function of adjective phrase is as external modifiers. It is usually occur at the beginning of the noun phrase and before the indefinite article a. For the example, how long a delay will there be? How long a delay? How long is adjective phrase, and it is occur at the beginning of the noun phrase a delay. How long is adjective phrase and a delay is noun phrase. Besides that, how long also occur before the indefinite article a. So this is called as external modifiers. The second example is it seems such a bargain. Such is adjective and it happened before the indefinite article o. And it happened before the indefinite article a. So such has a function as external modifiers. Okay guys, I think that's all from us. Thanks for attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.